It was supposed to be just another busy morning in New York City, until one arrogant bully made a mistake that would leave an entire train in stunned silence. He mocked a quiet woman, humiliated her in front of everyone, and thought he'd walk away untouched. But what he didn't know was who her husband was. And when he found out, his world turned upside down. Stay with us. What you're about to witness isn't just a confrontation. It's a masterclass in quiet strength. And the way it ends, you won't forget it. It was just after 8 a.m. on a gray, rain-washed Tuesday in Manhattan. The city pulsed with its usual chaos. Honking taxis, hissing steam vents, dripping umbrellas tapping hurried footsteps on concrete. Down below, deep in the veins of the underground, the number 4 train roared toward the heart of the city like a machine on a mission. The platform at Crown Heights Utica Avenue was already crowded. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet pavement and burnt espresso. As the doors hissed open, the human tide pushed forward, spilling into the already jam-packed car like liquid into a sealed bottle. Among them was a woman, quiet, composed, and almost invisible to the rush of bodies surrounding her. Her name was Rosie Huntington Whiteley. But no one recognized her, not dressed like this, not without the flashing lights and red carpets. Today, she wore simplicity like armor. A black wool coat hugged her slender frame. Her blonde hair, usually styled to perfection, was pulled into a low bun. Her hands clutched a canvas tote close to her chest, as if it contained something sacred. Inside were 2 crisp apples, a freshly baked sourdough loaf, and a jar of imported honey she had picked up from a small organic market in Prospect Heights. A soft bundle of gardenias wrapped in paper poked out from the top. She had visited her sister earlier that morning. Just a quick visit, one of those moments stolen from a busy schedule, the kind you treasure before the world wakes up again. As she entered the train, she moved with instinctive grace, like someone used to navigating spaces where they were neither noticed nor welcomed. She didn't take up space. She didn't demand attention, but she did deserve respect. She stood silently near the door, scanning the car. No empty seats. But there, just ahead, one man sprawled across 2. His legs stretched out as if he owned the place. A speaker clipped to his backpack blasted bass-heavy music. His hoodie sagged off one shoulder. Head down, eyes glued to his phone. His body language radiated entitlement like a strobe light. Rosie stepped closer, gently balancing herself as the train lurched forward. She made a quiet motion toward the seat. A small request, nothing more. But the reaction she received was anything but small. He didn't look at her. He barely moved, just shifted slightly, tightening his grip on the phone. The music thudded louder. Then, as if to declare his territory, he slid further into the second seat and turned away. The message was clear. She didn't matter. Around them, people noticed, but pretended not to. A man beside him blinked behind his glasses, then returned to his newspaper. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. A teenager swiped quickly through his feed, avoiding the moment. Rosie didn't argue. She simply stood, gripping the pole with one hand and her tote with the other. The train rattled forward, the wheels shrieking beneath them like distant cries. As it passed the Nevin Street station, the car jolted suddenly. Her shoulder brushed against the young man's arm. Barely a touch, a moment created by movement, not choice. And yet, he recoiled. The shift in his posture was abrupt, dramatic. He jerked away like she had infected him, twisting his face in exaggerated disgust. Then, loudly enough to be heard across the car, he threw a verbal jab, sharp and stinging. Not just at her, but at her existence. His voice, laced with mockery, bounced off the metal walls. Rosie's cheeks flushed. Her eyes dropped. She whispered an apology under her breath, the kind born from years of being told to shrink rather than fight. But he wasn't finished. He looked at her tote now, scanning it like prey. Another jab. A cruel joke about her groceries. A mocking laugh. He reached out and flicked the edge of the bag with 2 fingers. The bag shifted in her hands. One apple tumbled out, then the other. They rolled across the dirty subway floor, bouncing under seats like dignity lost in a crowd that doesn't care. She bent down slowly, knees trembling, reaching for them with the care of someone trying to salvage more than fruit. Just as her hand wrapped around the second apple, his elbow shot backward, sharp and fast. It struck her directly in the chest. She didn't cry out. She didn't scream. She simply gasped, air ripped from her lungs, as her body stumbled sideways into the metal subway door. The sound was dull, flesh against steel, but it reverberated through the car like a bell tolling in a church of cowards. And still, no one moved. Her tote hit the ground. The jar of honey cracked. The gardenias spilled. The young man leaned back in his seat, smiling like a king atop a throne of silence. His laughter filled the space between the poles. He tossed another insult into the void, scanning the crowd as if daring them to respond. They didn't. Rosie sat upright slowly, her breath shallow, one hand over her chest where the elbow had landed. Her hair had loosened, a few strands falling across her cheek. She didn't speak, just looked down. The silence wasn't normal anymore. It wasn't passive. It was alive, thick with tension, pregnant with shame. 100 heartbeats skipping in rhythm with the clatter of the train. And still, no one helped her, except someone had moved. Not loudly, not dramatically, not even noticeably. Until now. In the far corner of the train, a figure stood where he had remained since the ride began. Still, solid, silent. He hadn't said a word, hadn't reacted, until this exact moment. He stepped forward once, then again. Each movement precise, deliberate, boots planting with weight, shoulders squared, leather jacket heavy against his frame. A presence you didn't notice until it was already too late. He didn't look around. He didn't demand attention. But attention followed him like gravity. Passengers slowly lifted their eyes. Phones lowered. The noise of the train remained the only sound, but it seemed distant now, muted by the shift in atmosphere. Rosie hadn't seen him yet, but the young man had. His smirk faltered. The figure stepped closer, now only a few feet away. His face came into view, sharpened jawline, intense eyes, a calm stillness like water before a tidal wave. Jason Statham. He had been there the whole time, hidden in plain sight. But now the silence belonged to him. He looked down at the apple that had rolled near his boot. Then slowly, very slowly, he lifted his gaze. And for the first time since the train had left the station, the arrogant young man didn't speak. Because in that moment he realized what no one else on the train had expected, that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't alone. She was married to the quiet man now standing before him, and that man was Jason Statham. The train rocked gently on the tracks, a mechanical lullaby masking the tension that now gripped every soul inside that subway car. Time seemed to stretch, folding in on itself as Jason Statham took another step forward, silent but seismic. Passengers shifted subtly. A man near the center of the car adjusted his glasses, then immediately looked away. A woman near the doors clutched her purse tighter, as if shielding herself from the weight of the moment. A teenage boy, who had earlier been glued to his phone, now watched without blinking, holding his breath like everyone else. Rosie remained seated on the floor, one hand pressed to her chest where the elbow had landed. Her eyes were lowered, but her senses stirred. She could feel him now. His presence, the way the energy in the car shifted like an unseen current bending toward him. Jason stood tall, boots planted wide like he'd anchored himself to the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The mere act of standing had already broken the spell of apathy that had held the passengers hostage. The young man who had shoved Rosie, who just seconds ago had basked in the spotlight of ridicule, now sat frozen in place. His swagger was leaking from him in real time, like air from a balloon pricked too suddenly. He looked up at Jason, trying to read his face, but Jason's expression didn't offer rage. It offered warning. Jason's eyes shifted briefly to the tote bag spilled across the floor. One flower petal lay crushed beneath a boot. The glass jar of honey had broken, its golden contents oozing slowly across the grimy train floor, like something sacred bleeding into indifference. The sourdough was smeared with footprints, and beside it, a single red apple still rolled, circling idly beneath a bench as if waiting to be reclaimed. Jason crouched without a word, not to fight, not to strike, but to pick up the apple. He turned it in his hand. One side was bruised, the other side was whole. He brushed it off gently with his thumb, then set it carefully on the edge of an empty seat. The message was clear. Even things that are bruised deserve care. The young man swallowed hard, his composure fractured further, and in the corner of the car, someone finally raised their phone, not to scroll, not to post, but to record. Quietly, almost shamefully. The passenger beside him whispered something under their breath. A name. A possibility. Jason heard it, but he didn't acknowledge it. He wasn't here to be recognized. He was here for one reason. Rosie. Still seated on the floor, she looked up now. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not fear, not desperation, just understanding. She didn't ask him to stop, she didn't need to. Jason straightened again, eyes still locked on the young man in the seat. That was when the laughter returned, not from the aggressor himself, but from his friend, seated just 2 rows away. A heavier man, zipped hoodie, arms crossed over his chest. He leaned forward with a mocking grin, nudging the first guy with an elbow like a playground bully spotting backup. He barked out something dismissive, loud, meant to re-establish dominance. Jason turned his head slowly. His eyes didn't narrow. His jaw didn't tense. But the room felt colder now, like the temperature had dipped without warning. The second man stood, not rushed, but ready. A new wave of tension rippled across the car. People looked toward the doors instinctively. No escape. Not yet. Then it happened. The second man reached into his jacket and pulled something short and black from his waistband, a blunt object, not flashy but purposeful. A nightstick. He didn't threaten with it. He didn't raise it like a weapon, he just held it. And then, like lightning without thunder, he struck. The baton sliced through the air with a dull, brutal arc, striking Jason across the side of the head. The sound it made was thick, sickening, like wood on bone. Jason's head jerked sideways. His knees buckled. His body crashed into the pole beside him, then slid downward. Gasps erupted. Rosie screamed, but it was a scream stifled by shock. Jason collapsed. He hit the steel floor with a thud that echoed louder than any words could. His shoulder crumpled beneath him. One arm flailed. The apple fell from the seat, landing near his hand. And for a few heartbeats, he didn't move. Not even to breathe. The train kept moving, but the world inside the car had stopped. The man with the baton stood over Jason now, breathing heavily, chest rising and falling. His face wasn't filled with triumph, only detachment, as if he'd just completed a chore, not an attack. The passengers were silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not apathy, fear. Someone whispered, "Did he kill him?" No one answered. Rosie dropped beside Jason. Her hands trembled as she touched his shoulder, gently turning him toward her. His head lolled to the side. Blood trailed from his temple across his cheek, painting a vivid stripe down the collar of his coat. The air was thick with panic, but no one moved. And then he breathed, barely. A shallow rise of his chest, a twitch of his fingers, a flicker of life. Rosie leaned in closer, whispering something only he could hear. Her voice cracked, her eyes filled. Jason's eyelids fluttered once, then again. He blinked, slowly, the kind of blink that says, "I'm still here." His gaze focused on her face first, then it shifted upward, to the man with the baton still standing above them. Jason didn't growl, he didn't lunge. He planted one elbow behind him, then the other. And like a storm rebuilding over the ocean, he rose, bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. The man with the baton took a step back, not out of guilt, but caution, because whatever had been sleeping inside Jason Statham had now fully awakened. He stood tall, swaying slightly with the motion of the train. The steel pole beside him shimmered faintly with blood. His hand gripped it, not for attack, but for balance. Rosie stood beside him now. She didn't need to hold him. She knew better. His strength came from something far deeper than muscle. The man with the baton raised his weapon again. Jason didn't flinch. The moment hung in the air, electric, trembling, unbearable. But it was Rosie who broke it. Her voice cut through the tension, not a scream, not a plea, just one word, and it was enough. The baton didn't swing. Jason stepped forward slowly, ignoring the threat, walking into the space the man had tried to claim. His hand reached out, not for the baton, but for the man's wrist. He caught it mid-air, not forcefully, not to injure, just enough to stop it. The weapon clattered to the floor. The man tried to pull back, but Jason didn't let go. Not yet. And in that frozen second, the entire car understood one thing with perfect clarity. Jason Statham hadn't come here to fight. He had come to finish something that should have never started. And as Jason's hand closed over the chest of the man who struck him, pushing him back with calm, undeniable force, the subway car collectively held its breath. Because what was about to happen next was no longer about vengeance. It was about teaching every soul in that car what true strength really looked like. The air inside the train was no longer oxygen. It was pressure, invisible, but crushing, hanging thick in every corner of the subway car. Every eye was now fixed on Jason Statham, not as a celebrity, not as a name, but as a man who had just risen from the floor with blood trailing down his face and fire radiating through his silence. He hadn't barked orders. He hadn't roared threats. But somehow the car had shifted around him. Even the metal beneath his boots seemed to resonate with quiet command. The man with the baton stumbled back into a pole, one hand still clutching his wrist where Jason had stopped him mid-swing. His confidence had been heavy a moment ago. Now it cracked, thinned, and bled away like the red line on Jason's temple. Jason took another step forward. And then, the second thug lunged. This one had waited, hiding in plain sight at the other end of the car. Hoodie drawn tight, eyes sharp, fist clenched. He moved like someone who had seen too many action movies and believed himself the star. He surged forward, fists raised, full of momentum. Jason turned. In one fluid motion, he ducked under the wild punch, grabbed the attacker's arm, and twisted his momentum sideways. The man crashed hard into the metal siding of the car, ribs colliding with steel. The sound, ugly, final, made even the bystanders wince. He crumpled to the ground with a groan, curling inward like a man who had just remembered pain was real. Jason didn't look down at him. He didn't need to. Across the car, the original attacker, the smug young man who had started it all, remained frozen in his seat. His legs were no longer sprawled, his mouth no longer smirking. He looked at Jason like a student looks at a teacher who's caught them cheating. Guilt, fear, and a slow dawning comprehension. Jason stared back, not with fury, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that speaks louder than rage ever could. He stepped toward the young man. Each footfall echoed, not in sound but in consequence. But before Jason reached him, a sharp movement broke the moment. It was the third thug, the heavier one who had watched from a distance, who had smirked from the shadows. He'd been crouched, pretending to stay out of it. But now his bravado snapped. With a growl that masked fear, he charged. Jason didn't hesitate. He sidestepped with calculated grace, letting the man stumble past him like a bull missing its mark. The attacker tripped on the outstretched leg of his fallen friend and slammed headfirst into a bench. The clang of bone on steel reverberated, and he didn't get back up. That was three. 3 men, each taken down without excessive violence. Just control, precision, intent. Jason stood tall in the center of the train now, chest heaving slightly, the blood on his face beginning to dry. His coat was torn at the shoulder, a red smear darkening the fabric, but he didn't seem to notice. He turned back to Rosie. She was still near the edge of the car, standing now, her back straight, hands clenched lightly around the handles of her crushed tote bag. Her face held no panic, no worry, only pride. Jason approached her slowly, carefully, like he was walking back from war, not victorious, but intact. He took the bag from her hands with reverence, shook off the broken glass, and gently placed it on an empty seat nearby. One apple remained, softened by the impact, but whole. He positioned it carefully on top, then met her eyes. Nothing needed to be said, but everything was understood. The car had gone silent again, but not from fear this time. From awe. Not one person moved, not one phone lifted, not one voice rose. They weren't spectators anymore. They were witnesses. And Jason Statham had just shown them all what it meant to be strong without ever needing to raise his voice. Then, without warning, the silence cracked again. The man with the baton, still conscious, still burning with humiliation, rose behind Jason. He didn't reach for his weapon this time. He charged with his fists. It was the kind of attack that came not from strategy, but desperation. Sloppy, wild, explosive. A final grasp at control. Jason turned with eerie calm. He didn't duck. He didn't counter with brute force. He stepped in, too close for the man's punches to build power, and caught the attacker's wrist mid-air. Again. The move wasn't aggressive. It was surgical. Then came the twist. A simple shift of the wrist, a pivot of the shoulder, and the man lost control. The baton clattered to the floor. The attacker stumbled backward, caught off balance by his own momentum. Jason didn't stop there. With his left hand, he pressed firmly against the man's chest and shoved, not to harm, but to deliver a message. The man crashed into a pole, fell to one knee, and didn't rise. Jason stood above him, not gloating, not victorious, just still. He turned back toward the center of the car. All eyes were on him. The original bully still sat frozen by the door. His hands were trembling now, his back pressed tight to the subway wall. He wasn't looking for a fight anymore. He was looking for a way out. Jason took a single step toward him. The young man scrambled, desperate, fingers fumbling for the emergency door button. He slammed his palm against it, hoping it would open, but the train hadn't stopped. The tunnel outside remained black. There was nowhere to run. He turned back, wild-eyed, and lunged. A punch, sloppy and desperate. Jason dipped to the side, letting the force carry past him. In the same breath, he caught the young man's wrist, hooked an arm around it, and twisted. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The scream came a second later. The young man collapsed, clutching his arm, eyes wide with shock and pain. There was no more defiance in him, no more arrogance, only surrender. Jason stepped back, not to admire what he'd done, but to breathe. That made four. 4 men, 4 decisions, 4 consequences, and he had never needed to shout. He had never needed to threaten. He had simply stood. The subway car remained frozen. No one moved. No one dared. Rosie stepped forward. Her movements were quiet but deliberate. She placed a hand on Jason's arm, her touch soft, grounding him. He exhaled, not from exhaustion, from release. Then, behind them, the first attacker, the one who had mocked, laughed, shoved, shifted slightly where he now sat crumpled near the door. His bravado had shattered completely. His eyes no longer held defiance, just understanding and fear. He didn't speak, because he didn't need to. Jason didn't look at him, because he didn't have to. And as Jason turned his head, his eyes scanning the faces around him one last time, no one dared meet his gaze. Not because they feared him, but because they now understood him. But what none of them knew was that the final reckoning hadn't happened yet. The real test was coming, and this time, it wouldn't be measured in punches. The subway rocked gently, rhythmically, like nothing had happened. Like the floor wasn't scattered with fallen men and spilled groceries. Like silence hadn't replaced the noise of indifference. Jason Statham stood in the center of the car, his body still and upright, but his presence expanded into every corner of the space. He wasn't flexing power. He was radiating control, effortless, quiet, immovable. Rosie stood beside him now. She hadn't cried, she hadn't begged, she hadn't needed to. Her presence, like his, was anchored in something deeper than emotion, something that came from experience, from knowing the difference between fear and respect. She looked down at the crushed tote bag, still resting on the seat. The single surviving apple had rolled slightly again, now resting against the armrest. Bruised, but not broken. Jason picked it up. He held it in his hand, turning it slowly. The reflection of the overhead lights gleamed off the bruised skin like a scar that hadn't fully healed. He handed it to her, not with ceremony, but with care. Her fingers closed around it, trembling. Not from weakness, but from the weight of what had just passed. The man with the baton, the last one who had dared to strike, remained crumpled near the pole where Jason had left him. His head was lowered. His breath came in sharp bursts. The rage that had filled his eyes earlier had drained, replaced now with a kind of hollow vacancy. He didn't rise again. The heavier man who had crashed into the bench hadn't moved at all. He wasn't unconscious, but he wasn't eager to return to his feet either. The pain had taught him what pride couldn't. And the original aggressor, the one who had laughed when Rosie entered, was now slumped near the emergency exit, cradling his arm, eyes wide and glassy. His lips moved, but no sound came. It wasn't silence by choice. It was the kind of stillness that comes after your illusion of power is shattered. Jason didn't speak to him. He didn't even glance in his direction. Because the lesson had already been written in every second that passed since Rosie had first stepped into that car. Some lessons didn't need to be spoken. They needed to be lived. The train screeched softly as it began to slow. The lights flickered, and the automated voice overhead announced the next stop, Grand Central, 42nd Street. The passengers stirred, but still, no one moved. Jason turned to Rosie, gently placing a hand at the small of her back. He didn't guide her, he simply offered presence. Together, they took a step toward the doors. Boots against steel, heels against tile. The train hissed to a stop, doors opening with a sigh. And no one blocked their way. No one reached for a selfie. No one asked if he was really Jason Statham. They all knew. And they also knew that what they had witnessed wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about integrity. The kind that doesn't yell. The kind that bleeds and still stands. Rosie stepped onto the platform first. Jason followed. Their shoulders brushed lightly, two parts of the same story moving forward together. As they walked down the corridor of Grand Central, surrounded by bustling strangers who had no idea what had just happened below, the chaos of the city returned. Tourists argued over maps, vendors shouted about fresh bagels, footsteps echoed off marble. But for the people left behind in that train car, none of it mattered anymore. Back on the subway, the silence lingered. Not awkward, reverent. Phones had been lowered. The devices that were once raised to capture chaos now rested in laps and pockets. Some passengers had recorded it, others hadn't, but none of them would forget it. Because what they had seen wasn't violence, it was discipline. What they had heard wasn't shouting. It was silence that demanded reflection. What they had felt wasn't entertainment. It was justice. And for many of them, it was the first time they had witnessed a moment where someone truly stood up for someone else. A boy near the doors looked at his mother, his voice barely more than a whisper. His lips formed a question, unsure, shaky. His mother didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were still fixed on the space where Jason had stood. Then slowly, she nodded. "Yes, baby," she mouthed. It was. Down the concourse, Rosie walked in rhythm with Jason. Her gait had regained its grace. Her shoulders had relaxed. The apple remained in her hand untouched. Jason reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a crumpled shopping list. It had smeared ink and a faint red mark near the top corner. Blood from earlier, now dried. He glanced at the paper, then at Rosie. She looked at the apple. He raised an eyebrow slightly, a silent question. She gave him a small smile. The kind only someone who truly knows you can give, only if they're ripe. He nodded once. They always are. No crowd followed them. No applause chased them. They didn't need it. Because sometimes the greatest moments in life don't happen in arenas or on movie sets. Sometimes they happen in subway cars, on quiet mornings, when no one's watching, until they are. The train rolled on, back into the tunnels. The passengers stared ahead. None of them would remember every word spoken that day. They wouldn't need to. What they would remember was the stillness, the breath that had left the car, and the man who stood, not because he had to, but because it was right. Some people think strength is loud, that it needs to shout to be heard, but real strength doesn't ask for attention. It earns respect in silence. And today, an entire subway car saw that firsthand. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on what it means to protect someone you love, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were there? Because sometimes a single moment of courage can change everything.